Have you ever been watching the news, maybe coverage of a protest, and you see the local police, and you think to yourself, wait, did they look more like soldiers getting ready for combat? It's a really striking image, right? Well, it points to a much, much deeper issue, something scholars call police militarization. Today, we're going to break down what the research says it is, where it comes from, and most importantly, what it means for all of us.
This question isn't just about how things look. It's not just optics. It gets into everything: the kind of gear police are using, the training they get. And ultimately, it comes down to the safety and the civil liberties of the very people they're sworn to protect. So today, we're going to unpack this whole thing by looking straight at the research.
Welcome to a deep dive from the Security Nexus. We are a Maryland-based national security consultancy, and we specialize in strategic advisory, education, and public engagement. Basically, through our podcasts, blogs, and consulting, we try to provide real insight into this evolving landscape of cyber threats, hybrid warfare, and security policy. Our whole mission is to inform, educate, and empower you with clear, accessible, and actionable knowledge. All right, so here's our game plan for today. First, we've got to define what militarization even is. Then we'll get into the actual tools and tech involved. After that, we'll explore the consequences and the risks. We'll also dig into the scholarly debate on this, and then zoom out to look at the threat to democracy before we wrap it all up with some key takeaways. Okay, so first things first. Before we can really analyze the issue, we all need to be on the same page. What do academics actually mean when they talk about police militarization? Because, it's a lot more than just a buzzword. So a lot of the foundational work here comes from a criminologist named Peter Kraska. And he argues that, at its very core, militarization is fueled by an ideology he calls militarism. It's a mindset. It's this cultural belief that force is simply the best, most effective way to solve problems. And this ideology, this idea, is really the engine that drives all the changes we see out on the street. And what's absolutely crucial to get is that Kraska breaks this whole thing down into four separate dimensions. It's not just one thing. First, you've got the material dimension. That's the armored vehicles, the rifles. Then there's the cultural. That's the big shift from seeing police as guardians to seeing them as warriors. Third is organizational, like creating elite, military-style units like SWAT teams. And finally, operational, which is using military tactics for everyday police work. So let's talk about the most visible part of this whole thing, the material dimension. I mean, how do local police departments even get their hands on military-grade equipment? Well, a huge piece of the puzzle comes down to one very controversial government program. Just look at that number, $7.6 billion. That is the total value of military gear that has been transferred to local, state, and federal police through the Department of Defense's 1033 program. It is a massive pipeline of hardware flowing straight from battlefields to American streets. But hold on, here's a really important bit of nuance. A 2024 article in the Journal of Criminal Justice took a deep dive into this. They analyzed over 125,000 requests from law enforcement. And yeah, military-grade weapons are definitely part of the program. But what they found is that in 2019, 92% of all the stuff transferred was actually non-controlled items. We're talking office supplies, generators, things like that. So while the images of tanks are incredibly powerful, the data shows the reality is a bit more complicated. But that doesn't mean the weapons aren't getting through, and it's definitely not the only way militarization is evolving. Because, you see, militarization isn't just about physical hardware anymore. As a scholar named Julia Gabrielli points out in a 2025 paper, the new frontier is all about surveillance. Facial recognition technology, or FRT, is now being used by governments all over the world, from the US to Russia, to monitor protests, to identify who's participating, and to track their movements. And this raises some really profound questions about privacy and the freedom to assemble. Okay, so we've got the ideology and we've got the tools. What happens when they're actually put into practice? Well, the research points to some incredibly serious consequences for both public safety and for our fundamental rights. This right here is a really stark illustration of what's at stake. A 2017 study by Delahanty and his colleagues found a direct, statistically significant link between a county getting military equipment and an increase in civilian deaths from police shootings. The results were, well, they were shocking. Their analysis showed that going from the least militarized county to the most militarized county increased the expected number of civilian deaths by 129%. Let that sink in. The data shows a direct line from military gear to civilian fatalities. So why does this happen? Well, the authors point to a classic concept in psychology. You've probably heard the saying, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That's basically it. When police are equipped and trained like soldiers, they become more likely to approach problems with military style violent solutions, even when other, less violent tools might be way more appropriate.
And the consequences aren't just about physical violence. As Julia Gabrielli argues, all this surveillance tech creates what's known as a chilling effect. I mean, think about it for a second. Would you go to a protest if you knew your face was being scanned and logged into some government database? That hesitation you feel right there, that is the chilling effect in action. It discourages people from exercising their democratic rights.
Now, it's really important to point out that while the data on these outcomes is pretty alarming, academics don't all agree on the root causes and the justifications for militarization. This is an active, ongoing, and really important debate. So on one side of the argument, some scholars say that militarization is actually a rational response to what they call an expanding mandate. The 2024 Journal of Criminal Justice article points out that police are now on the front lines of, well, everything, from natural disasters to counterterrorism, and this gear, they argue, is a necessary resource. But then on the other side, you have researchers like Lawande and Delahunty presenting data that shows it doesn't actually make anyone safer, not officers, not the public, and it is linked to more civilian deaths. So what gives? Well, a crucial point here is how we analyze the data. Some early studies looked at data all lumped together at the county level, and you know what? They mistakenly found that military gear reduced crime. This is a classic example of what's called an ecological fallacy. It's kind of like saying that because a rich neighborhood has low crime, every single rich person in it must be law-abiding. It's a flawed assumption. When later research, like the work we've been discussing, properly analyzed the data at the agency level, the actual police departments getting the gear, that crime reduction effect completely vanished. So this brings us to a bigger, more global question. What is the relationship between how a country polices its own people and the overall health of its democracy? Research from Adhikari, King, Amurti in 2024 gives us a really powerful answer. What they found is that any level of democratic backsliding, any erosion of democratic norms, has a substantial and lasting negative impact on human rights. And the worse the decline in democracy, the more severe the damage to human rights becomes. This really suggests that policing and the health of a democracy are deeply, deeply connected. And this chart illustrates the whole spectrum perfectly. In their 2021 study of Latin America, Flores Macias and Zarkin mapped out all the different degrees of militarization. And way over on the far end of the spectrum, you have something they call the constabularized military. It's a mouthful, I know, but it basically just means the most extreme form of militarization, when a country's actual army is used for everyday local policing. And the consequences of going that far? They're severe. Their research shows that using the military for policing actually undermines efforts to reform the civilian police. It often worsens citizen security instead of improving it. It leads to a spike in human rights abuses. And maybe most dangerously, it completely blurs that essential line between national security and public safety. So after going through all this research, what's the so what? What are the actionable takeaways? How can this knowledge actually be applied by the people who shape security policy and practice? So what does the research seem to be calling for? Well, for policymakers, it's a call for real oversight of these equipment programs and for regulating surveillance tech. For police leaders, it's about prioritizing investment in de-escalation training over more tactical gear. And for all of us, for civil society, it highlights just how critical it is to advocate for transparency, reform, and accountability. So, if we boil this all down, what have we learned? First, police militarization isn't just one thing. It's a complex process, and it's driven by an ideology that favors force. Second, while the debate over why it happens continues, the data clearly links militarized gear to an increase in civilian deaths, with no proven benefit to officer safety or crime rates. And third, these domestic policing trends have really serious implications for our civil liberties and for the health of democracy itself. The data really leaves us with a tough question. If militarization doesn't reduce crime or protect officers, but does lead to more civilian deaths and chills free speech, what kind of security are we actually buying? The debate continues, and if you want to explore the research for yourself, please visit us at thesecuritynexus.net.